So, hi everyone, welcome back to Technosemiotics over a long break that we've had in this autumn. And today I'm really happy to introduce you to my Tartu colleague, Maarja Ojamaa, who is studying digital world and digital semiotics. And she's an associate professor at our department. And recently she published a book co-written with Indrek, Ibrus and John Hartley on the digital semiosphere, where they then are looking for answers how to manage the changing digital climate, so to speak, and the effect of technology on the world, on biosphere, on environment, and on our cultures. And yeah, so she will share her insights, and then we will have questions and discussions after that. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Auli, and good evening, everyone. My introductory notification is about my biological clock, which tells me it's time for chasing kids to dinner table and bathroom and bed and not engage in intellectual activities. That's why I'm afraid I'm mostly gonna read my notes, but that's life. You gotta take it or leave it and stay strong. Anyhow, indeed, the plan is to introduce the collaborative work that we undertook together with, as Auli said, Indrek, Ibrus and John Hartley. It was actually already started a while ago. We first met in 2018 to start the book, and it took shape afterwards online until it was finally published Christmas Eve in 2020. And to start with, of course, this book is quite extensive in its scope in a way, so I had to choose a more specific topic for today. And I would like to concentrate on the concept of culture, and more precisely on the role or even the potential of the semiospheric notion of culture for making sense of what's going on in the world. So the essence of the argument is the primacy of culture. We assume that at the core of our global technologic and also economic, political, even planetary processes lies an elemental force. This is culture. So culture is like the invisible fabric that binds us and drives us, but has also been dividing us. However fundamental all this seems to a semiotician or people in humanities in general, for that matter, it actually seems that by many other audiences, especially among people who govern our digital age, culture remains overlooked when discussing the important issues. It's reduced to mere numbers, to a cost or even a hindrance to entering yet another market, for example, rather than engaging in a fruitful dialogue. Therefore, these groups often find themselves at odds. And at the same time, given the planetary challenges we have ahead, or we are facing right now, actually, the core motivator of these challenges being human beings, cultural beings, it seems that the forces of all domains that share the goal of enhancing our understanding of the world and finding better ways to live there should be united. So this means, or would mean, that sciences, humanities, but also arts, activists should in dialogue work out new, more sustainable understanding of humans and even propose models for regulating human systems. And this is also one motivation behind asking Estonian photographer Peeter Laurits if we could use his photos within our book. So you see one on the cover, but there are some also inside. And these photos function perhaps as something more than your regular illustrations of a verbal text. These were a conceptual part of our work, because Peter Lauritz has been thinking about many similar topics within or in his language, his visual language of photography. Of course, the print version, neither in the English nor in Estonian, didn't do much justice to his work. So in this case, the digital one is much better, where you can actually see colorful photos. So in some proposed that culture, therefore also semiotics actually, is not the kind of say rhetorical layer on or around real things, but it participates in their becoming and existence. And this is admittedly a broad and ambitious discourse, but to systematize it, we were following the logics of a micro, meso, and macro scale throughout our book. And this might be familiar from the field of economics, but it seems to fit in quite well also with the semiospheric logic. It's because it allows for explicating similarities or isomorphic mechanisms between different levels in human culture. That is, connecting the individual with the planetary, from a human mind to a text, to an individual culture, to the semiosphere, is the logics of Lotmanian thought, these being isomorphic levels. Each of the lower ones is seen as interlinked facet of our global semiosphere. So for this book on the digital world, Lotman's model of the semiosphere offered us a dynamic framework that captures the multifaceted interplay between individual narratives, cultural or media industries or institutions, and global communication patterns and global semiosis. And it does it without resorting to divisive binaries, which are, let's say, a habitual take. So let's go. First, a word on digitality and why we need the concept of the digital semiosphere as not a separate semiosphere, of course, but a semiosphere of its own. And then on to culture. So by digital, see if I can change. By digital, we mean the constellation of phenomena that now dominate the information or knowledge society, where converged and integrated electronics, telecommunications, etc., drive military, the economy, politics, and mediated culture at personal, corporate, and international scale. So in other words, digitality encapsulates the phenomena dominating today's knowledge society. And it integrates the above elements to propel various sectors on multiple scales. The scope of digital interactions from personal to corporate and international levels is vast and continues to expand. Because as of July 2023, there are over 5.19 billion internet users, which accounts for 64 or over 64% of the global population. So of course, internet in Estonia is a bit different place compared to internet in China or Russia or even the United States, but one can still identify several traits in common among them. Okay, then why digital semiosphere? Because while the digital semiosphere is of course an integral part of the larger human culture and in our human semiosphere, and in fact we cannot really distinguish anymore the digital culture from analog or off-screen culture, and digitality still possesses unique qualities that distinguish it from what came before. And in our book, we suggested three key reasons to approach, namely the digital semiosphere. as kind of, let's say, semiosphere of its own. So the first being what we have called global awareness. We argue that the creation of the binary distinction us versus them is one of the constitutive forces in all cultures, and that cultural universal in Lotman's terms. And that related meaning-making processes functionally precede or condition dynamics in many other systems, be they economic, political, or social. So we in this construction is not surrounded by a neutral other, but an antagonistic other. And this can be regarded as a staged conflict, which does not reflect reality, but alters it. And this staged conflict, together with individualism, have been on the way of forming a global awareness of us as one species. But there are signs in the digital sphere that we might be able to overcome these barriers. So I'm referring to the agenda for youth-led or even girl-led climate justice action, both online and on the streets, which is still made possible by the social media or digital communication technology more generally. And this is, this global awareness aspect. It seems that humans only become aware of themselves as a single global species when faced by a singular globular threat, be it nuclear catastrophe, a virus, or global warming. The responses to these threats remain fragmented and often nationalistic still. And in any case, they are far from global. And other efforts towards global unity, such as big religions or working class, these also have remained actually inherently exclusionary. So there are some people who belong among us and others who don't. But global warming, as if we take this main challenge, it's not something we could solve, I don't know, here in Estonia or even on the Pacific Islands or some African regions, which are most vulnerable to the effects of it without contributing much to the causes. We need to change global systems. And people seem reasonably confident about identifying who we are at species scale when it is a matter of distinction from distinguishing ourselves or inside from non-human others like animals, dead people, aliens, etc. But despite the best efforts of supranational agencies like the UN, humanity has so far found it near impossible to act as a species at macro scale. So global collective action remains at meso or institutional level, which is pursued by corporations and governments who represent and favor limited and potentially antagonistic groups, even when dealing with planetary problems like diseases or global warming. And globalization of collective responsibility and purpose is neither fully macro, so population-wide scale, nor fully micro, internalized at personal scale. But as said, we might be progressing on our way to, say, we-dom, as John Hartley has put it. Though, of course, it's not a linear process. We are also witnessing the resurgence of what many call tribalism, threatening rational civilization. This is reactionary right, Trump, Brexit, online misogyny, fake news, post-truth journalism, etc. But yet, if we look at the longer scale, then across or over the centuries, awareness of others has been growing, and knowledge has been increasing, and this is through contacts with the other. And in the process, the scope of usness or we-dom has also been expanding. And of course, this awareness, you might claim, might be stereotyped and might be simplified, but there are also constant exchanges, growingly flows and remixes among different cultures, groups, and systems. There is increasingly greater hybridity among them and the emergence of convergent forms. You might take the example of, simple example of K-pop. So it's captivating audiences globally while still preserving their inherent Koreanness. That's at least how they are perceived. So when Straubhaar once coined this cultural proximity thesis, it was in 1991, and he argued that audience's first preference is always content from own or neighboring national culture. We have moved on, and this is no longer so. So from 1991 to 2023, there's this progress, or whatever you call it, the change. Okay, that much about global awareness. Secondly, there are digital traces, digital communications leave behind physical traces. And these include anything from clicks to conversations via usage metadata about who watched, listened, read, what, when, in which order, for how long, etc. And all this can be recovered for observation and analyzed in ways that spoken language and situated cultural meaningfulness cannot. And thirdly, machine-driven meaning making. The devices that facilitate our communications also already generate the bulk of the content we consume. So it's obviously quite crucial to understand the automation of cultural production, the roles of AI, and how networked activities are continually being molded by computational processes. So this complex nexus of human and machine semiosis. Machines and technology have become so prevalent in our personal and especially our interpersonal lives that some scholars like Karsten Hermann Pillath, who Tartuvians might know, advocate for conceptualizing the technosphere as an emergent planetary sphere, while the semiosphere is a realm of meaning-making and consciousness. The latter consists in tangible artifacts and technomass. So while rooted in human innovation, it now operates semi-autonomously, advancing beyond direct human interventions. And this independent agency manifests in various ways, from the unintended consequences of human actions to the self-propagating technological pathways that then feed back into human behaviors. And this underscores a key point. Though the semiosphere gave birth to the technosphere, both are now deeply intertwined, undergoing a co-evolutionary process. And in addition to the hybrid entity of human and machine semiosis, and of course also very much relatedly to that, we are also seeing how the human semiosphere is influencing other planetary spheres, as the concept of the Anthropocene suggests. So in sum, the digital semiosphere rooted in human culture has implications extending to the planet. So stories, myths, narratives from Beowulf to Game of Thrones, these showcase a pattern of humans often casting themselves as heroes against some external threats. But in reality, we are now in a situation where humans are posing significant dangers to the planet and for us, most notably themselves. And this prompts kind of naturally one of the questions that was asked in parallel by Umberto Eco on the one hand and Juri Lotman and Boris Uspensky on the other. And this question is, what does culture want? And here you can see their answers. So the consensus between them is quite profound. Culture seeks to make infinity comprehensible. It aims to structure and order the boundless universe around us. And this, of course, recalls semiosphere, which is then a tool for organizing the world, acting as a generator of structure, ensuring continuity of social life, but perhaps also organic life when we recall this Semiotian proposal of the coinciding nature of life and semiosis, as semiosphere by later definition is the space of semiosis. The semiosphere then provides a framework for explaining culture as a unified system, a whole, a holistic view, albeit one that is extremely rich in internal heterogeneity. And this heterogeneity, the richness of mutually untranslatable systems, is due to the myriad ways communication systems model different realities that the human species finds itself in. Therefore, the semiosphere becomes a region of multiple realities, as Kalevi has proposed. Kalevi will. And the well-known delineation of the semiosphere into the dichotomy of the center and periphery arises from the capacity of its subsystems to establish descriptive metalanguages. So systems that do generate such languages to form descriptions of the whole sphere become the core, while the rest lie on the periphery. But it's crucial to understand that these subsystems, even if seemingly incommensurable or untranslatable, cannot function in isolation from each other. They need the overarching structure of the semiosphere to mediate and create meaning. And Lotman he postulated that the semiosphere is both the sum of all languages and a necessary precondition for their existence. And so from this concept, we can take a number of traits that help us make sense of our digital technology-saturated world, which we referred above. So first, what I already hinted at, but should be underlined once more, is the crucial role of autocommunication, whereby systems communicate with themselves, about themselves, create this we-them, solidifying their identity and functions. This capability of self-interpretation and self-understanding defines meaning-generating systems, which is applicable across various scales, from individuals to groups and institutions to planetary culture. And the autocommunication aims to reduce internal heterogeneity, fostering unity and differentiating the system from external factors, and thereby rendering the system more static and stable. While in the peripheral cultural phenomena, there is no capacity or perhaps even no will or interest in it, and thereby the periphery retains greater semiotic dynamics or dynamicity is the word, yes. But yet, the more complex any system in the periphery becomes, the more it feels the need for the stabilizing forces. So, for example, if you take the global platforms such as Netflix and Spotify, these benefit immensely from the network effects, and these platforms engage in a form of autocommunication, which is based, among other things, on the specific metadata they collect and algorithms they employ to cater to specific audience tastes and even influence new content production. So thereby creating also specific technocultural bubbles, as we call them in the book. And these bubbles represent both the economic and communicative efficacy of systems. But metadata creation, as we know, is resource intensive, which leads very often to its standardization, which might not always cater to dynamic cultural needs. So therefore, these homogeneous systems might not always be the most effective in providing new value. And the bubbles then get popped or blown from time to time. So younger people quitting Facebook and Instagram for TikTok is a simple example. So we clearly see that for the sustainability of the system, dialogues within the semiosphere and across its external boundary are not optional, but essential. And they arise from the peripheries where dissatisfaction and curiosity lead to the merging of distinct knowledge domains. And digital culture has further accentuated these universal processes. Second, memory. Memory plays a pivotal role in the human semiosphere, as we all know. So, simple example, ancient texts, which should become obsolete, are instead reinterpreted through new cultural codes. So unlike in the biosphere and the technosphere, where species could die out completely and machines are abandoned for new technologies, in culture this does not happen. Interpretations and reinterpretations ensure cultural continuity, while transforming the core and peripheral layers, and thereby potentially also introducing innovation. So also all meaning isn't merely a result of automatic processes, as we know, but it emerges from active dialogues with text. And this dialogue-based memory or concept of memory ensures that cultural recollections remain selective and never exhaustive. And therefore, there is always a creative dimension to cultural memory. And now when we get to this next trait of creativity, this too has specifics in the semiospheric framework. Namely, creativity cannot be located in an individual mind, let alone in some sort of property, but it can analogously function only within dialogic culture, which is in turn immersed in the semiosphere. So Lotman described creativity as governed by the translational logic. And from there, he draws some lines also to artificial intelligence, as he was also interested in the topic at his time. And his basic premise was that an essential condition of any intellectual structure is its internal heterogeneity. So the structure of AI needs to include mutually untranslatable semiotic formations, one being based on the linear discrete principle and the other or another on the continual homomorphic principle. And without such dichotomy or diversity, the apparatus would be without internal dynamics and capable only of information transmission, but not of its creation. So Lotman characterizes a thinking object as necessarily characterized by partial and selective knowledge, which concurrently implies a certain semiotic freedom. So a freedom to establish new equivalences between the object domain and the meta-language. Therefore, the growth of knowledge causes a growth of unawareness instead of diminishing it. And this perceived lack of knowledge can be compensated by the stereoscopic or triangulation approach. So the possibility of acquiring different and new projections of one and the same reality and its translation into different but integrated codes and meta-languages, which is the standard processes in culture. Based on the above principles of creativity, Lotman relates artificial intelligence to poetic texts. Upon its entering into a circle of communication, a poetic text is capable of creating new meanings depending on the codes put to use. And in the first part of his book, Universe of the Mind, the part is titled Text as a Meaning-Generating Mechanism, Lotman stresses the centrality of making a choice between the elements of interpreting language while establishing a conditional, previously indeterminate equivalency between the elements of source and target languages. So intelligence is contained in the act of selection at certain bifurcation points. And the process and the result of this selection are not governed by randomness, but by a freedom of choice within a certain artistic concept or another frame or system that appears integrated from the internal viewpoint. And that is also what distinguishes a thinking dialogue partner from an automatic unconscious mechanism. So in other words, a structure that has risen to the level of intelligence transforms, quote, transforms randomness to freedom, unquote. So the result of the impossibility of a singular scenario is the potential existence of many different, but in principle equally correct translations as the output of the mechanism's operation. Then, in the case of equilibrating systems, a mechanism of correction, likewise based on selection, starts up to determine the most relevant results in relation to the hierarchy of codes within the system currently. And this hierarchy, of course, changes over time, and that is why the predictability of culture remains very low, or culture can be analyzed in terms of probabilities, not predictability. Now these keywords that you see, autocommunication, creativity, memory, dialogue, translation being codified in at least two systems, we see these as effective tools for making sense of the ongoing globalization of many different realms of life, but perhaps also a model for regulating it. So this current stratification of the internet between the pervasive influence of tech giants like Facebook, Amazon, Google, and their Chinese counterparts, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, on the other, and their shared orientation towards consumer-driven, shopping-centric surveillance focus. These are undermining the once global and public value-driven vision of the web. And the current state is contributing to us as a species crashing the planetary boundaries one by one. So there seems to be a need for a comprehensive regulatory model catering for sustainability. And as a somewhat provocative and essayistic proposal, we posit that the semiosphere might be the model entity best suited for this task. This was my brief and fragmented introduction of the work. And perhaps you can now tell me if any of this is relevant for technosemiotics, and maybe you have some ideas or thoughts about this regulating issues or any other thing you might see as relevant. But yes, thank you for your attention so far.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. Does anybody have questions, like just straight away? Any ideas?
Sorry, someone has asked about semiotics. I wasn't really, yeah, maybe I should.
I dropped some links in the chat, but.
Okay.
Oh, Chris, do you want to speak up also, or you prefer that I just read it?
Yeah, I'm happy to read it out. Yeah, no, just interested. Thank you very much for the presentation, Maarja. I'm not sure if that's the way I pronounce your name, but appreciated. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm interested in getting hold of the book, perhaps, and having a read. Just one curious two questions: what does stereoscopicity mean? And yeah, do you cover sort of the explosion aspect in culture? It may not be the explosions that I mentioned. There may be other, and obviously digital culture has had a lot of different paradigm shifts in the last 20 years. But it seems to me we're on the cusp of a particularly big one. Is that get covered in the book, in the course of the book?
Yeah, first, stereoscopicity. The idea basically, let's say we have one reality, one world, but we can describe and make sense of it in very many different languages. And these different sense-making products are complementary to each other. They give us complementary perspectives or scopes of the object. Okay. So, and this is also why I claim that the arts, humanities, sciences, they function as different meta-languages, different systems of description of one and the same world. And we cannot really put these into a hierarchy, saying one is more adequate and the other one is like a rhetorical layer to the real description. But the stereoscopicity is this idea that we get different projections of one object, which are complementary between each other. So you might just think of verbal and visual sign systems. So there are things that we can do with words, explain about an object, but we cannot do some things that we can with words that we can do with images. So none of them is better or worse. They just give us different projections. I hope this explained a bit. And also explosions, yes. We do talk about explosions as well, because, yeah, you know, this digital sphere has been quite explosive in the recent decades. Explosion then being, for those who are not familiar, the event of the birth of something new that initially we might not have, or we definitely don't have a language for describing what actually happened, what is it? And then there are very many different options on the table. And this explosion becomes complete once we will find a way of describing it, making sense of it. And this always happens after a while.
Okay, so yes, so yeah, that makes sense. So is the premise then you cannot understand an explosion during the explosion because exactly. It's too disorientating, and you haven't got enough distance from it. Yeah. Okay.
The definition of an explosive event, you lack a language of description that would come from the previous experience. This is something completely new. Even though in culture, of course, in the end, we see how everything relates to what came before, but the moment of explosion is when we really feel that we don't have means of explaining it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It sounds very much like McLuhan's notion of I'm not sure if you come across the Narcissus narcosis. He talks about different media changing from one to another is, I guess, sort of technological determinism, but it's difficult to see that because it's very disorientating. And violence is a violence, sort of psychic violence, obviously a very different model, but that's what it reminds me of when you talk about it. But
that's one instance.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, Josh, did you want to comment also on something, or Daria?
Yeah, Daria, go ahead.
Thank you, Josh. You're a real gentleman. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah.
I will also try to put a camera so you can see me, because I know communication online can be sometimes tricky. Thank you so much for presentation, Maarja, and I actually love this book because it's very interesting, but it's also very different from some other literature we can find from like Turin Research Group or from Christian Bankov. It seems that digital semiosphere tries to embody everything like more holistically, globally, in respect to maybe some other research would just touch some points and not generalize in general. My question would be related probably more to the pedagogical aspect of the processes which are happening within digital semiosphere. So as you were talking about the algorithm which propose sort of categories or sometimes filter bubbles to the users, it can be also that users accept them and do not recognize them as anything particularly dangerous, and they adopt them into the perception of the semiosphere as a whole. So what do you think about this impact of the digital semiosphere to the semiosphere in general? And obviously we're talking a lot about the problems related to global warming. So how do you think in general, how is our learning capacity to get from this kind of models like digital semiosphere to integrate it into our daily life and our communication processes in general?
I'm not sure I got your question right. So it was about, on the one hand, the bubbles we might live in the digital semiosphere that define the ways we understand what's going on. And on the other hand,
digital semiosphere is, as you told, it's not separate to semiosphere in general, right?
Yes, this, Lotmanian concept is, English is good for this. We can talk about a semiosphere, then it would be a tool for making sense of any meaningful system. It could be an individual culture, but then it could be actually, I don't know, a book could be understood as a semiosphere or conceptualized as a semiosphere. Then there's the semiosphere, which is the space of all semiosis. And in this sense, or in this scale, we cannot really distinguish, or the digital semiosphere is just part of the semiosphere, the space of all semiosis, because it's also about semiosis.
Yeah, so question was more related to the accepting these models as they would be the reality, probably in relation of more like perception and adaptation of this kind of models to our life. Probably I would just do example if it would make more clear my question. If we take an example of deepfakes, about which Chris was asking in his question, I did study a bit this phenomena, and I realized that some people, they do not realize that this is deepfakes when they see them online.
Many people don't.
Yeah, as for example, AI modified images of female face often do not recognize, especially by male audience, whether for the education or because, I don't know, they believe in general that women look like that in real life. But many just believe that it's not a deep fake, it's just maybe angle or I'd say they perceive it as real images of the real people. So what do you think about adaptation, like when the practice which born online within digital semiosphere transform into the reality and the perception of the reality of the semiosphere?
Mm-hmm. But isn't it a kind of broader question of how those new technologies have always altered our perception of reality, be there literature or more visuals being integrated in our world, and now it's the time of the digital sphere impacting our perception of the world. So I think Theo van Leeuwen and together with another author have written about this digital visuality and how it actually has transformed this visual modality as it was before, based on this 35mm photography and this questions of indexicality, which are not relevant anymore, because in the digital sphere, the computer doesn't tell a difference whether this is a photography or photograph or whatever other image. It's just a collection of pixels. So these are transformations, and of course they affect or do have their effect our perception of reality as well. But I don't see reason for too much pessimism at the moment.
Thank you so much.
Maybe a comment on the deepfakes also, as I've been looking at it, as it's going to be my next project probably, but as far as I've found, actually, one of the more alarming consequences of deepfakes is not that, like, there are like a lot of these expressed fears that, you know, it will kill political voting and like you can't trust anything anymore and epistemic apocalypse and whatnot, but actually like the more skillful deceptive use of the fact that we have deepfake technology in culture is more like still relying on the old deception mechanism. It's just not like not putting out a deepfake of your political opponent, but casting doubt on a real video as if it was a deepfake. And this is like a purely semiotic process, which it's like the video could exist or not, or it's like whatever it is, but like it's purely like this discursive fight that then ensues basically. So yeah, there's this and that.
I don't think so, as an answer
Oh,
to
yeah.
Ariel's question.
Yeah, will AI replace human intelligence someday? Yeah, we tend not to think so, mostly in semiotics, I think so.
At least we won't find out about it after it would happen. But yeah, semiotic or semiospheric logic tells us it's not possible.
I kind of love this Lotman's idea from the 70s, although I wanted to ask actually also whether you think that what Lotman described as AI is actually conceivable as what we have as AI like right now, because it's quite different. Like Lotman's picture seems to be like very like this, we're very an ideal type or something like that he projects. But one of the things that he also said about AI, I think, was that if we look at it as like another level of culture, like put somehow computationalized or put in a machine, then actually what they also said in the co-written paper there was that if you take humans away from it, then it will be like dead culture. So it won't renew anymore. And this is actually something that we see right now with model collapses in AI, is that if you train AI on AI generated imagery, then it's not capable of, so to speak, creating new things anymore. Like the novelty still is like, there is one level of novelty on top of human like creative products basically, but then the next level you can't anymore because it will just collapse on itself.
Yeah, this sounds logic, but AI is not my field of specialty, and you can definitely say so much more interesting things about and interpret the Lotman's ideas in this framework more interestingly than me. But I assume there are things that are irrelevant in today's reality or what AI is today, but there definitely are things that that are relevant.
I guess I'll chime in if no one minds. Thanks for that, Maarja. I really enjoyed your talk and reviewing the book. I didn't read the whole thing, but I did get a chance to review some select parts, and I'm really intrigued with this idea of self-regulation, kind of a self-regulation, if you will. Like I think you guys might argue in terms of the semiosphere itself, regulating itself. I'm really intrigued with. I too think that's where we need to our level of analysis needs to get to, and and I agree also that Lotman's dynamical approach can really help us methodologically. And again, I haven't read the whole book, so this is really just a question as I potentially dig deeper into what your argument is. But I was a little one thing sort of gave me a little bit of pause on the road to doing this analysis, like using Lotman's notion of of semiosphere to have a self-regulation that could help us sort of transcend our current not optimal relationship with the biosphere, for example. But my concern was, especially in chapter 20, there seemed to be a presupposition or a normativity being that the periphery, that the languages of the periphery were like normatively considered problematic, that there was the interesting dichotomy in one of the sections of chapter 20 talking about, sort of like the utopia of what I interpreted is, and maybe incorrectly, like the utopia of the center, and then the dystopia of the periphery, which wasn't the words that, I don't know which one of you authors wrote that subsection, but that was sort of my interpretation. What was literally said was that all the, when most of us here in this Zoom call, for example, are essentially of the center, we're culturally, I would argue, our tools, our perspectives in the concept of stereotypicity, which I think is great. I think of the blind man and the elephant is an old story that I think relates nicely to that. I think we too have our own view, and that we have to be really careful insofar as I think methodologically really want to employ Lotman's analysis, careful presupposing that certain narratives are bad, and that the periphery, that certain narratives in the periphery are somehow dystopian relative to some sort of presupposed utopia, as if the center is already embodies utopia, and it just has to maintain itself against the narratives, whether it's, in a sense, it's not even I'll leave it at that and just see what your thoughts are so far. My probably misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I guess what we were trying to say was vice versa, the opposite. We were trying to stress the value of periphery and this movement of, let's say, the big corporations forming up this core and trying to get bigger and bigger and downplay the periphery. What we were arguing is, yes, the value of heterogeneity, diversity, and the value of periphery. So one example is these girls who have been definitely the periphery of cultural hemispheres so far, but their ideas about, let's say, this Greta Thunberg as an example, and the movement around her, which is built on her, mostly on her Instagram account, actually the ideas there, in a way, even complexity and a holistic view of her view on the problems with the climate, but also their relationship to social issues, and how she is stressing the need for this what's the word in English, õiglane üleminek, or this how we need to prepare in terms of the vulnerable populations when we are doing this green turn, or whatever we call it. So yeah, what we're trying to do is stress the value of periphery. But of course, with the model of semiosphere, of course, this the dichotomy of core and periphery is also, it depends on the viewpoint, right? So I don't know, Netflix might be in the core of this audiovisual entertainment online, but from the viewpoint, for example, of quality film festivals and this maybe film awards, Netflix is quite in the periphery. So we have to also remind ourselves about the perspective of the who is describing the system.
Yeah, okay, well, that's very helpful. Yeah, thank you. I guess one follow-up then would be, yes, I think like maybe most of us here, at least on this Zoom call, definitely was very inspired by Greta Thunberg and others who speaking truth to power, to put it oversimplify it perhaps. But the center has been so good at kind of recuperating and usurping those efforts and then turning them for their actually maintaining the status quo. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's going to happen with Greta's efforts, and maybe an aspect of her efforts will do that, but then another aspect will be the soil from which something else will occur. But in your guys' analysis, is there something about Lotman's sort of systems there, dynamical approach that, and your guys' interest in this idea of self-regulation, that Greta Thunberg as an example could be seen as part of that self-regulation that can transcend, say, for example, capitalism's really freaking consistent ability to recuperate, going back to the civil rights movement and the hippies and the punk, like countless cultural movements that just get commodified and actually sustain, but well, anyway, you probably get my point. So does your analysis dig into some of those issues?
Not specifically, but yeah, I mean, this is the big question.
Yeah.
And we're who would be able to do it, but this is the whole idea that we seem to need a new model for regulating us as humans.
Yeah.
This would entail a holistic understanding of us as a species, that we would internalize not only on this meso level, that would be states and institutions, but also in interactions as a species, and also internalize, believe in this micro level as humans and directing our everyday choices. So it seems that so far we are still basing on this adversarial model of us versus them, and we are still individualistically trying to, stand only for our own interests, even in the global issues. But somehow it seems that this model of semiosphere that actually gives us tools for sustainable systems should be implemented practically.
Yeah, agreed.
But how to do this is another question. Definitely just not only criticizing what's going on will not get us there, but we should join forces, sciences, humanities, arts, activists, etc.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, good to see you, and thank you for the talk. I had a question on other topic, but to continue this one, maybe others also have more like related questions. So the idea of the binary opposition in it. So as I see that it's talked about or is discussed here is that there's so as a solution of to take global actions, etc. It's kind of as if it requires overcoming of binary oppositions. Am I correct in a way?
Could you rephrase it once more?
In a sense that in the sense that binary oppositions. So if there is sort of this global unity, like actions on macro level, how to deal with climate crisis and other crises, it doesn't sound to me that it's it means that this binarism would disappear. It might mean that like other kind of binarism might appear instead. So if you take the the sci-fi ideas that the aliens come and everyone unites suddenly, but that sort of thing, that it's probably not aliens, but some kind of othering that will actually appear.
Yeah, we won't be able to escape those binaries. This is part of human logics and our bodily logic. So this is my body and this is outside. So me and my surroundings. But the point is that what we need to train ourselves to do is to see how the binary is actually forming another higher level whole. I don't know, us as Estonians and you as of some other nations, we actually form up a new whole, which would be human beings or whatever, training our mindset to understand how there is always this semiosphere that we are immersed in both parts of this binaries.
It sounds also like in political science and so on. I think Wenzel and others have also discussed this. So it's also the same idea that, moving away from sort of the othering, but it means just being aware that there are different views and keeping them like sort of being aware of them at once. Like this is a big thing in itself.
And this is what John has been writing about before, how actually, those terms of how the other was also a barbarian because they didn't speak our language, and how these pejorative or adversarial ideas were also instilled in language, how our perception of the others has actually growingly become more favorable. Or there are very few people who actually just think that if you're from another nation, you are by definition bad or not as good as we are. So we actually have some still at least minimal level of empathy and interest towards people who are different from us. And this has been a growing process, and it seems that, for example, those girl-led climate movements are actually offering us a model how we could broaden this understanding of us that would encompass also be all the people in the world. Of course, then we could be, there are who are not us, are aliens or whoever, but it could be that we could have dialogues with them as well. So when we meet someone who is different from us, we should find a way to start dialogues before building walls.
Yeah, well, well, expanding on the same thing, then like if you take a political context, for example, so when the othering has shifted from in like sort of othering between nations into othering into, let's say, conservative and liberal, and then it is more sort of a friction within one culture. And like, what if in a global culture this othering will take the same form, that it's us who deal with the problem and we see a solution for it, and then the other will be those actually who are like who are working against the climate, or how we perceive that, or also like the people of the global community, but we don't but they're sort of taken as the other, or sort of one end of the binary, because they do not deal with the problem, whilst let's say that girls in climate movement do. So this is like, I guess it's one way to see this binarism on a global scale.
But the hope is, or the reality is that actually people who actively are against this idea that climate change is human-led, who are actively saying that, no, this is all just scam, these people are quite few, actually. And when we would find a way, as a, you know, or this thinking of about global usness would become a normality, or something that we learn about or learn to do more in schools as well, perhaps, then this would also mean that the people advocating against or shouting out that, I don't know, climate change is not the problem, actually their voices are not that, this difference, and their voices maybe should be even there, but you know, the effect they have on our acts as a species is not that bad.
Yeah, I see. If does anyone else have a question to continue? I have a sort of a more methodological one. So anyways, there's so about the idea of cultural science, well, like coming from Hartley, right? So I just like want your take on it, and opinion also, that there's so if you take people from like hard sciences or so, and how they perceive science, it seems to be quite different, like less holistic, etc., and really operationalized, and everything has to be tested, and often you might see that there is like there's like, seems to be like drive towards this one interpretation, or like, you know, the ground truth, or sort of the idea of realism, sort of against this constructivism or something like that behind it. But at the same time, it seems that so the Lotmanian, so how it's, I know maybe you disagree how Lotmanian like theory is applied. It's more holistic, and it doesn't drive towards this one truth or anything like that. And interestingly, it's so when we talk about the cultural science, there seems to be this sort of friction, I see, between these ideas.
So how I see is that cultural science is a way to make to communicate our understanding of culture, of humanities, people's understanding of culture, and the importance of cultural processes to people that I mentioned in the beginning of my talk as well, who might have a very simplistic understanding of what culture is and what culture does and what is the role of culture in all those technological, economic, political processes. So cultural science is also a way or a language to communicate about the issues of culture to people or to audiences who might not be interested in cultural science and humanities in general. And I guess John has been quite successful in it in some instances. But yeah, I myself consider, despite the title of the book, still a cultural semiotician, not a cultural scientist.
Yeah. But I do see that, like, potentially, like if the audience would be the ones from the more science community, then I can like see what their like possible like criticism would be and so on. But no, I'm but at the same time, because there seems to be like interesting movement now. It's like because actually this more more like sciencey crowd or more computational approaches and so on. There's like the recently discovered digital hermeneutics, for example, and there is and all of even the AI different large language model, like certain methods that actually they now evoke these questions that actually these methods, they afford us different interpretations. So if you use like you apply this ChatGPT, etc., you know, it gives you only one interpretation in the end. And so everything that seems to be was like, you know, driven by maybe this people from more pure science or like realist mindset, they maybe there is a movement towards actually understanding there is like that this whether like the science way of doing research or so on, it's kind of coming together with these humanities, and there is more space where this kind of maybe a hermeneutic or like or this interpretation that's more these methods that are more holistic and try to grasp different interpretations so they can actually fit in better for like in more fields maybe. Yeah. It's a good, we're going in a good direction.
Josh.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, just to sort of build off Mark's comments too, and in some ways, Maarja, you've already answered these questions, but I'm just using this as an opportunity to explore my own, as I'm trying to take my focus on biosemiotics into the cultural realm. This is a great opportunity for me to explore some of these exact ideas and some of my questions and concerns. Because maybe I'm a little less optimistic. I wouldn't say I'm, you know, a pessimist by any means, but I think we have our work cut out for us. And I am intrigued with this. You know, I'm new to this, very new to this discipline of cultural science, and I'm coming at it. Even though I'm in biosemiotics, I'm coming at it more from I'm the baggage, so to speak, that I bring is maybe a bit postmodern, a bit Simondonian. So Simondon has some very interesting critiques on culture. Obviously, the postmodernists have some very interesting critiques on the idea of culture as kind of this hegemonic force. And what I find really powerful about Lotman is that, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the beauty of his system, his methodology is that the center is not synonymous with culture. That culture, that there are dynamics, there are peoples, there are tribes, there are groups in the periphery that have cultures. And that, so there's this, exactly to your point about, I think your really powerful point about stereoscopicity, that the peripheries have these nascent or like your example of women and girls and their perspective on the climate crisis, many different communities with their own perspectives, and how it is they get heard is a really critical question. But again, building off Mark Metz's kind of point, I think a bit, maybe I'm a little more pessimistic about like culture studies and culture science, insofar as we're trying to, that our object of study is culture, because I think that runs the danger of, insofar as we try and clarify our object of study being culture per se, we're of course have our own predilection for what we consider culture, that only, despite our best intentions, I think can actively dissuade us from being more open to many more voices. And so I'm just curious about how it is all of us as semioticians, our methodology could sort of not inoculate us, of course, we're always going to have our biases, but how it could help us not fall into what I believe is that trap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm struggling to find the right way to answer you, but I must say, yeah, I see you're pessimist, but I still don't think.
It's not really a pessimism; it's more of a caution, I suppose. It's just
looking
at like the whole discipline of postmodernism is largely exploring all of these traps that modernism fell into, and that capitalism certainly is a huge, in terms of habits. If we think of capitalism as a habit of humanity that's maybe neither bad nor good, let's say for a moment, it's just a habit that it's really adept in its own self-regulating way of maintaining the status quo, maintaining the power structures as such, and then how we as semioticians, not necessarily redoing what the postmodernists have already done in their critiques, but move forward with our analysis using Lotman, for example, to move the project forward.
Yeah, but Lotman is more holistic than this postmodern criticism has been, and maybe where we have gotten by this capitalism and all the other vices is because we have been ignoring culture. And the human semiosphere, how it operates, and perhaps bringing this more to the core of the discussions about what's going on in the world, actually show us a better way of going forward.
Yeah, well, I definitely think the more holistic approach is absolutely, without a doubt, a necessary first step. That's for sure.
Well, what I would be a bit more maybe pessimistic about is that, I know, so the classical maybe humanities methods or so, it's not the one like driving the change, etc. It's if you take even sort of far-fetched connection that what's driving the societal change now, who has the power, so it seems to be still these big IT companies, and how also this generative AI will, so who will profit most of it, of course. So it seems like the way to, it requires criticism, it requires better understanding, like also like outside of the same system. But yeah, so the pessimism is like in the sense that it's not that like Lotmanian semiotics is not the one that dictates how the culture looks like, or it cannot like easily do that, but it can this way of modeling the world, it can contribute to those other sort of those in power and other systems that are actually more like as if more modeling the world right now. It can contribute to how to direct them actually somehow, and if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and actually the argument is that such regulation would be in favor or in their own long-term interests. This would allow for their long-term sustainability, because the current model does not support it.
Yeah. Well, actually, this comes to I've been thinking lately to the idea of the robustness, and it's actually something that's in complex systems. It's now also more explored because it's like more technically, mathematically possible that how society is, built, and if it's also like criticism of capitalism. So it's like it's not robust. It cannot sustain itself indefinitely. It seems, right? It's planet will crash, so on, and yeah, but it's this kind of robustness. Actually, different fields are working on it in really different ways, and there is also this holistic, more holistic approach has a lot to contribute it also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was also wondering, you in the book, at some point you mention how cultural studies and economics are very similar in the fashion that they both constitute their object of study in the process of studying it. And at the same time, they have very, very different approaches. But I was also wondering, like, how do you see they could complement each other? Like, because economics, economics tends to sort of like desemiotize everything that doesn't fit in the model. And then they end up with a lot of what they call externalities. I think environmental economics has been trying to like account. So this is like all the kinds of other kinds of impacts that sort of like just occur at the value chain somewhere, but they are like not directly accounted for. And then of course it makes it like a huge complex system in a way. It's like, where do you delimit, like what do you have to think of when you create a product or produce it or something? So do you have any perspectives on that?
In integrating, or the integration of economics and cultural studies, then John's works are your go-to material, because he really has done it and written very interesting things, all those cultural industries works, etc. So actually our book is also part of a trilogy in a way. So for him there were 2 books and these issues also before it, which were all published with Bloomsbury. But I'm not in a shape of giving you this comprehensive answers at this point.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions, or we can just also start wrapping this up a bit earlier than usual, but yeah.
This is going back to the AI thing really quickly, just to bookmark it for future conversations. And I really like this idea, Maarja, you mentioned of how the relationship between Lotman and AI. I've dug a bit into Lotman's relationship to cybernetics, going back to Ross Ashby and reading Sylvie's paper, which was fantastic. So I'm really intrigued to now to dig into how it is his characterization of intelligence, generally speaking, relates to the actuality of what we call artificial intelligence today. And I just had a quick thought that I think you mentioned not quite what I'm about to say, but something similar, that for Lotman, intelligence entails both translatability and untranslatability necessarily. And what I'd suggest is that current AI actually and a key subtlety, I believe, for Lotman is that translatability and untranslatability have to coexist in the system, that they have to both be there in as he says, in Universe of the Mind, I think page 15 actually, that they're there in the appropriate ratio, that they not unlike Peirce's notion of irreducibility, that these things aren't iterative, they aren't sequential. Whereas in artificial intelligence as it actually exists today, it is actually the translatability, the code, the algorithm is perfectly translatable, but then it alternates very abruptly with untranslatability, like injections of randomness into the system. So anyway, I'll just put that on the table, maybe if anyone's
And
interested.
also actually the notion of untranslatability, it refers to that there are no exact translations. These are impossible, but this translatability comes from this continuous effort to still to keep those translational processes going in culture. So in this sense, they are always together. But yeah, this complete translatability is impossible, and that's Lotman said untranslatability, but still it's actually conditional translatability, that we don't have exact match between the units of two languages, but there might be areas for one specific unit in the other language.
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay, but yeah, then we can end here, I think. And thank you to everyone who was part of it. And huge thank you to Maarja for presenting at such a late hour for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me and for your comments and questions. It will keep me thinking.
Okay, and well, until we meet again.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.